get too excited.
He says, don't get too excited. I'm standing in a food forest that's 90,000 acres. Guys, we made it. We are here officially at Halsey, the biggest hand-planted forest in the world. This is going to be really incredible, and I don't know really a lot about it, so we're here to learn and we're going to figure it out. Behind me and the car, back that way, there's some big old greenhouses, and then we're hoping to be able to hang out here at some of these cool locations. We got the family with us, so we're just going to explore, and I'm going to give you all the information that I find out so you can come out here and see this for yourself. And then I got a special treat in mind for you on how we're going to make this useful overall on an educational level for you.
Oh, they tell you what tree they are.
So behind me now, I just came across this rain garden where they have a spillway from the parking lot runoff they're capturing in this berm and gully where they've planted in sunflowers and various other wildflower species to take advantage of that water and the slope in the landscape where the water is sucked in and permeates down through the subsoils, allowing those deep-rooted or more water-loving species to grow and take good, strong root systems. Not wasting the water that's running off of this pad, but funneling it through a productive garden. Okay, look at this. This is a wild grape. Technically, nothing here is wild unless it came from nature's system itself once the forest was established. But because the forest was established, all these things are just popping up. Look at this. The perfect demonstration of a wild food forest environment. These are grapes forming on this shrub layer, vining up from deep underneath to produce these wild and edible grapes. Integrated in, we have mulberry coming into the rain garden, where all of these interplanted wildflowers and other species can be grown and harvested. Okay, this made me so happy. I'm getting more and more excited the more about this that I learn and see. All these native species, they had wild grapes, they have sunflowers, rain gardens, river catchment, and then right behind me, they have this variety of elderberry that stands so tall, grows like a tree just outside the ranger station, and it's just loaded with berries. They have all this going on.
What does it say?
Golden elderberry.
It says golden elderberry? That's golden. That's golden elderberry.
Wow.
Then the water would go all the way down into pine country.
Behind me here it's a little section of earthworks done to capture the flowing groundwater that runs across the landscape. Typically in agriculture or in most city environments, they'll call it a berm and they'll make it to channel water away. Whereas the purpose of a permaculture swale is to slow water's movement across the landscape and allow it to seep in and permeate through the subsoils. That is what they've done here in this mounded section of earth, where it catches all the groundwater that runs off the side deep into this system and then flows through the land, allowing all of these other species around it to grow more abundantly. Now we're walking across this little section where they've got all these apple trees, elderberries, gooseberries, variety of edible species planted freshly, all young, gated off and on poles to help them stand right here in the public section, where they're going to be freely available to those who come and participate here in the forest. How cool is that? So in each one of these tree sections that they have planted out here, they have them wrapped with wire and posts. The reason is so that this wire can keep out deer and other animals that might try to eat the bark of the young trees, or even the whole sapling altogether. And then they have these poles to help keep it upright. When the tree gets as big as this one here, they remove the strings from the poles to allow it to flex in the wind, and it builds the fibers in the stems. In permaculture, we'll recognize that man will try to intervene like that, and in more intense ways, to where the tree is growing with so much support that it can't support itself. And when you remove the poles, it will snap right over. And so in permaculture, we look at that perspective, and then we turn that into something more enabling nature's natural processes to take part in its own way. So from the very get-go of a young sapling, those fibers growing up and down in the stems are nice and solid and strong. All around the forest, as the natural ecosystem is restoring itself, young saplings and sprouts are still popping up from native species now seeding. And I guess native species might not be the right word because they brought them in. But what's happening is ecological restoration. The natural elements are taking back over. And as their nursery is still planting out, natural species selection is taking place. This is how the cycle does over and over and over again to restore and regenerate a landscape that once was desert sand into a thriving forest. I'm standing now just off the bank of the Loup River, a 68-mile tributary of the Platte River here in central Nebraska. This river here is responsible for much of the wildlife and the ability that they've had to plant the trees and recreate the ecosystem and really nourish that biology as this effort has moved forward. This is really an incredible thing that they've done here. And outside of what they're doing, naturally speaking and ecologically speaking, this river is contributing to the natural restoration of the ecosystem's own efforts in combination with the hand-planted forest here in Nebraska. So I'm standing on this bridge now. We're just walking across, exploring, checking out the area, and it's just blowing my mind how many species are integrated in together. Just off to the side over here, there's this elderberry bush. Vining up throughout it is wild grape. And then there's spruce trees, and there's ponderosa pine. And we have variety of these natives that are just popping up out of everywhere, soaking up this new environment that's been created over the last 100 years. The Middle Loup River is a tributary of the Dismal River. This river in the sandhills of Nebraska here is one of the most steady flowing rivers in the world. You can see the sand below the water levels. Say hi to my little dude. And it's just pulling up all of the sand from the bottom layers of the river up to the surface, carrying it further down, and it just continues that cycle. So there are literal sand dunes below this water level. We have along the side over here some cattails and some wildflowers growing prolifically along this riverbed. There's really quite a lot of things going on in the prairies, and this area right here is definitely no exception. On both sides of the sidewalk here, they used brick lay to be able to stabilize the mounds of soil because it was so sandy that it would have just washed away when they built this sidewalk. So let me get a close-up of that and I'll show you how they're stabilizing both sides of this mound to be able to keep the concrete pad along the edge of the bridge that I'm standing on here now. So right here, they've interlocked these brick lays. I'm sure there's a name for the type of brick that they laid that's specifically meant to interlock like that. But the purpose is the same. It allows the trees to grow up, the shrubs to grow through. The roots then will stabilize this and it will forever act as if it were mimicking a rock face on the cliff, stabilizing the edge and allowing for the true beasts of the forest to grow with beautiful paved walkways below, providing for nature and people. So right here they've included a fishing pond deviated from the riverbed. It's about the same level of the river, and it contains stocked fish as well as some from the river itself for the public.
That elderberry.
Yeah, we found some elderberry. Are you learning? You look so adult right now. You're growing up, dude. Okay, in this segment of the forest where I'm standing now is just off the trail here, and I came across a perfect demonstration of what it would look like in a hand-planted food forest at your own homestead in your own backyard. And I want to just break down for you what I'm seeing so that you can see the same thing. That has self-established after the original planting was done. It has started to grow back that ecological bearing, and nature's begun to take back over. Because ultimately that's the goal. Nature knows its systems. The ecology that exists in the forest and the world are already self-sufficient and stable and capable of producing what they need to produce to be able to thrive. So what we have right down here is a ground cover layer. We have deep shrubs that have rooted themselves into this riverbank. And right above it, we have now a bush layer, and past the herbs and the wildflowers and things that have begun to take root here. If we follow it up a little higher, you can see this spruce with the big berries starting to bush out on it. And even taller than that, now we have the upper canopy. In a food forest, we layer it just the same. This vining plant that has come up through the rest of this, I want to show you a close-up, because in a food forest, the way that we do it is food productive and agriculturally productive or system sustaining varieties of plants. So here is where the vining species has begun to climb all the way up through the canopy, stretching out its limbs, reaching for sunlight. Right underneath the canopy of the main forest overstory. Okay, in front of me now in the section of the forest that I'm visiting at the moment is this play area or recreational park where it deviates through OHV trails, camper hookups, variety of activities for families, and of course the ranger station, which is where we're headed now to learn a little bit more about this area. This is really beautiful, and what they've done here, creating a very family-friendly space with hand-planted old trees since the 1800s when this forest effort began.
For four-wheelers.
One of the biggest things that has helped them accomplish this feat of engineering, really, and this restoration effort that's just been absolutely incredible at what they've been able to achieve is windbreaks. This particular climate is so hostile. It has actually quite a desert climate in where we are. There are things like thistles and briars and thorns and sand hills that go for miles and miles in this side of the plains. Nebraska's climate was not exactly ideal for achieving what they wanted to achieve here, but the dream of planting a forest is what caused this effort to succeed. One man had a goal, sought after that goal until he was able to find those things and those resources necessary to achieve it. In the late 1800s, Charles Bessey saw the need to be able to achieve retention on the local timber resources in the area. In this harsh of a climate, it's necessary to be able to combat the natural elements to be able to build something as beautiful as this. Now, if you could imagine this at one point being a desert, you would have an idea of what they were dealing with. Windbreaks became the central point and focus in their design plan for this property. And as they laid out the grand plan and map for this, the struggles of this sand hills and the climate and the unforgiving environment, the efforts continued to be able to restore and regenerate this property and this landscape to be a forest. In about 1902, President Roosevelt started to fund this reforestation effort. And he turned this into a national forest, which gave it the ability and the funding to really get ground. The effort that has taken place here has had a national effect. Now, seedlings from this are planted all over the Midwest and all the way out into regions and drought-stricken climates in the West. So here we have lamb's quarter coming up, refertilizing. This is ponderosa pines and spruce and cedar layering the ground here, and underneath it here we have lamb's quarters. In this part of the camp and in multiple areas around the property, they have included RV hookups for power and for water. And they have little campsites where they have fire rings and different locations for families to come and enjoy the space. So they didn't just plant a forest, let it go, return itself to natural and go. They incorporated the human need in the area, and they did it ecologically in a way that provides for the Earth's needs. This is where Earth care and people care come together. Through selective fires and specific trimming and chopping and dropping of all of the different varieties as they become diseased or infected or brittle, they've been able to achieve something here. Is thriving because of the Loop River. And along the river, native species are popping up all the way up and down. We're going to go on a trail now to really see this effort in how they laid it out in the grid pattern following a windbreak system to combat the harsh winds and sandy hills in this area to be able to achieve the reforestation effort that they have achieved. Okay guys, this place is absolutely incredible. It's full of wild plums, wild grapes. They're planting cherry trees, a variety of apple trees, versions of elderberry that are bigger than what I've ever seen. We're following this trail now up to this valley overlook, and I'm gonna show you from the overlook what it looks like overlooking the plantation and how they built their rows lining specifically in this desert climate and on these sand dunes to be able to plant in the way that they have against the harsh environments of the desert winds. Most of this climate right here in the sand hills is so full of dense sand that it's a very challenging element to be able to grow food or produce or any kind of garden kind of goods in, but native species have thrived here. And they're doing this in a way where they're using these rows of trees in manner called a windbreak. And as they layer the windbreaks, for every 10 feet in height, the windbreak will protect for 100 feet in distance. So it's quite an incredible feat that they've been able to achieve, layering the windbreaks like this for several acres of land. And I think in total, this conservation effort from the beginning in 1902, when it was taken over and given financial backing by President Roosevelt, was increased up to now 90,000 acres in total park area. So this is actually quite an incredible space to be in. There's tons of spruce, pine. We just came across a wild plum, and we found some wild grapes and clusters all around the area. We're driving through now an area where there's wildflowers lining the roadways, cone flowers all over the place, and the native prairie has established itself in a way where it's now taken back the natural ecosystem. So over the last 100 years, 200 years almost, this has been restoring itself, and it's all thanks to proper design and a heavy effort on the part of the people involved. Just outside all these greenhouses throughout this nursery, they have native species to the area, or what they would believe would fit well to the area and become native over time. And they've introduced it by nurturing it in a nursery. They cultivate it here, grow it to a sustainable size, and then they transplant it to the forest. We're here now at the Valley Overlook. I'm super excited because once we get up to the top here, I think we're gonna be able to see the whole plantation and how they ran all of the windbreak systems. They did, I'm not mistaken, it was a pine variety that they did inside all of these windbreak systems. And so it's gonna be really cool to be able to see how they've matured and grown over the last 100 years. So come with me up here and we'll do just a quick overlook from the Overlook. Judging by the botanical surveys, they could tell that it used to be forested at one point. And so since the sandhills overcame it and devastated the land, and now it's just not a forest anymore, Charles Bessie saw this. He said, hey, I think we can do this. It was a forest before, it could be a forest again. And contrary to what most people think, most areas were forests before. And so we have the capacity through permaculture design and ecological thinking, just edible landscaping, to totally reforest entire deserted areas. And we're literally standing on a perfect example. Come and look at the sand over here. This is the whole valley. The whole valley here is just sand everywhere. The drive-in was so thick in sand that our tires were sliding back and forth. So if it can be done here, it can be done where you live.
You can see everything.
It's the desert, zoomed in, and then shablam. Okay guys, so we made it to the top of the Overlook. This is actually really cool. This direction, we can see some freshly planted trees. It looks like they've got a good amount of lumber being cultivated there. Right here behind me, you can see this massive clearing out in the distance. They call it the Sandhills for a reason. This side of the plains just went through so many different forest fires and logging that it just decimated the land. And when they discovered through the botany surveys, this had previously been forested, and they decided, hey, let's dive in, let's make this happen and turn the dream of planting a forest into reality. They did exactly that. And they took it from that desert landscape to this, a beautiful forested landscape. If you can kind of see behind me here, we have this large open space, and then across the open space, they have more forested area where they've planted even further. This effort was going on in a time where this big of a feat must have been incredibly difficult to fathom, because the resources that are available today aren't what was available 100 years ago. And with the way that this landscape was posing such a challenge between the drought, between the harsh elements, specifically the wind in such a desert climate, and the lack of moisture retention, because wind will actually evaporate water faster than direct sunlight. And with that being the case, to imagine planting a forest was just, it's got to be an ambitious idea, right? An ambitious person. When this was taken over by Roosevelt in 1902, and they got the funding and they really just blew this up, and it's become a conservation effort, and now stands as the largest hand-planted forest in the world. It's to me a pinnacle of what's possible. Now, if you can imagine a city where every backyard is planted in this kind of a pattern, and every backyard down the street, and every backyard down the next street and the next street, now you have whole cities mimicking this sort of a design, but with agriculturally productive species. We would feed ourselves from within our own landscapes. And this is really the effort that I want to lean toward with TIAG, and with the movement that we're trying to cultivate through that membership, and that movement of being more self-reliant and more self-sufficient. So stay tuned for more, and we'll dive into that another day. Before I take off here, I want to show you the soil, what they were dealing with when they planted this. See, I'm just walking out into the field here now, and I got the tower behind me in the trees there. Can't really see it. I'm going to turn the camera around and show you what this is like. If you think that you don't have the means to plant, you're mistaken. This desert climate is pulling up cacti and variety of native species to a desert climate. These tall grasses, and there's various difficulties that they experience here you won't experience. Where there's little to no regeneration. Now, the organic matter that they're incorporating is primarily pine. It's a high acidity, and being high acidity there and in sand, not very many things can handle that kind of a combination. And so through the permaculture lens, we would look at experiences that they're having here, the difficulties they would have here, study this as the precursor to what we would do in the neighboring towns, the neighboring counties, to identify the struggles that happened here and they're dealing with here, and correct them. Because we can see through this incredible effort that there are things that are happening here that are not okay, that are just not working out. And we can correct those because we can see this. Because it existed ahead of us, we can now use that education and that experience from those who came before us and correct it to the new systems. Through permaculture, we have an opportunity to mimic nature's natural ecosystems, and we do it with agriculturally productive crops that benefit people, planet, and future. We don't have to focus on today. We can focus on today and our children, our future generations. And what problems we have today can be solved for maybe not us in large scales, but for our kids by the time they come around, right? And that sort of thinking is what gives you, if that's what gives you motivation, can really push people to do incredible things. The people who planted and started this movement aren't alive today. And until the world gets to the point where they can plant a tree they will never reap the fruits from, we may not ever find that utopian paradise we all dream of, right? Where a food forest in every yard. But the efforts that we put forward today are in fact what will get that to reality. So I encourage you, don't be daunted by your experiences and difficulties. Look at what's possible and do something incredible. You're beautiful.
3, 2, 1, go!